Welcome to TikTok with Laku. Our guest today is a very special person and alum of Price College, Jeff Weber, who is the CEO of Zone TV, which is a leader in delivering AI-powered personalized entertainment experiences to a wide variety of devices, and they play with a lot of the big boys, if you will, Comcast, DirecTV, Cox, Virgin TV, AT&T, HBO, a long list, Sling TV, and then lots of devices that all of you might be familiar with as well, Roku and TiVo and Apple TV and so on. And prior to this, Jeff had a long and distinguished career at AT&T, culminating in his being the president of AT&T U-verse, the content and advertising part of that. He is, as I mentioned at the start, an alum of OU. He has a BBA in MIS from Price College and also an MBA from Northwestern University's Kellogg School. With that said, welcome, Jeff.
Thank you. Thrilled to be here. Appreciate it.
And I wonder if you can share your path to this point with us, Jeff.
Yeah, of course. Happy. And, you know, it's like so many things. This was not a pre-planned, thought-out process on my part, to say the least. Anybody that, if I tried to sell that as I had thought this through, they would know I was making it up. So I won't even pretend to. But it is interesting as I look back, as I sit here now. As you mentioned, I'm running a small company, you know, not quite a startup, but on the other end of the spectrum from AT&T, I'll say it that way. But what I have done through most of my career is startups inside the larger corporation. So I was the third employee in our broadband. It wasn't even called broadband then. I did the business case for DSL, the early, broadband stuff. I launched the second wireless PCS market in the US, and I did the business case for what became U-verse, as you mentioned, and then ran product and president content and advertising. So that's 20 years of my career or so. That was all inside a large corporation, Southwestern, Bell, SBC, AT&T, but in the startup side. So it's a very interesting mix of startup, but also trying to move a big beast that isn't nimble like a startup. And in the spirit of this program and what you've done, and I looked at a number of the episodes, and it's really interesting to watch some of the people you've had on. So this, I think, I'm afraid, is going to be a dip in the series, but I know you'll recover in the next one, so that's okay. So it's a really nice match of my risk profile. As you take some of those tests, I tend to be on the risky side, sometimes too much so, inside a company that's very conservative. And it was a nice mix of me pushing the company to take more risk, although, as you can imagine at AT&T, they're not going to get too far out over their skis and take wild risks. So it's not something that I could have, as I mentioned, thought about. I want to put myself in a position because I know myself so well and I'm going to take risks, but it'd be good to do it inside a more conservative place. So it's a nice bet. That's not something I ever would have thought of, but I think as people get into maybe the middle part of their career and they start to understand themselves a little bit better, you can think about risk profile for you, for where you work, and making sure those match up properly. And I think it was fortuitous for me, and that I happened to fall into that. Obviously, I'm aware of it now and try and think about that as I'm looking at opportunities as I go forward.
So and I love that idea, sort of this entrepreneurial mindset, Jeff, right, that you brought to this really behemoth, right? So this huge company that, and so you were able to sort of, experiment and do those things, somewhat mitigating your risk by being in that environment.
Right.
So you
right.
have a safety net to catch you. And so I'm curious too, and this is the purpose of the show in terms of, what makes you tick. doing what you did. And then, of course, subsequent to that, you took the risk yourself with Zone TV and so on. So what makes you tick in terms of, those two aspects, which are fundamental to the book that we talked about a little bit earlier with Flow, which is, going after those challenges that are meaningful to you. It's an intrinsic sort of journey there. And then the other part of it, which is, meeting up or skilling up to meet those challenges, preparing yourself to meet. And like you said, maybe it's not a conscious thing. Maybe there are experiences that happen along the way. But how did those two things happen, Jeff? This risk profile that you're talking about, which is really related to challenges. And then this other aspect, which is the experience part of your life. How did you kind of meet?
Sure. It's pretty fascinating how those play together, because I think about it in my case. I'll use UVerse as an example. So this whole quest to get into the TV business, we're at that point SBC, no experience in TV. You think about AT&T now, they own DirecTV, they own Warner. You go back to early 2000s, there was nobody in that world that knew anything about TV, nor anyone that thought we ever would, right? So, and I think about those two elements in the book, in Flow. Maybe I oversimplify it in terms of passion. Or you just have a passion, and are you enjoying what you're doing? Because the skilling part of that, there's different levels. There's leadership and understanding business fundamentals at one level, and then there's the specifics, maybe a little bit more tactical about the TV business and content and all of those things. And I think if you're passionate enough, if you're really focused and energized by something, skilling up, it almost isn't, it's fun. I mean, I loved that piece of it, even though if you step back, I didn't know a thing about it and was casting about in the dark in some ways in the early days. But it was really energizing. And so getting skilled up on that axis was fun, energizing. It happened really quickly because of all of that. And I think that notion of passion is really important. And I think you can control some of that. So I've had very few jobs in my 30 years or whatever it is that I didn't enjoy, assignments, if you will. Most of them were really fun. And I think there's a little bit of a mindset to that nobody's going to love everything they do or every element of everything they do. Obviously, that would be a little bit silly to think that. But finding what does energize you and get you excited and get you out of bed, and really leveraging off of that to learn, to skill up, as you use that term, I think that's critical. And you can control that, I believe, at least somewhat.
Right. So that's great, Jeff. And I was fascinated when I looked at, so you took all of that, and then you started Zone TV, which is, again, so tell us a little bit about Zone TV, because I think I know what it is, but I'd like to get it from the mouth, so to speak.
Absolutely. So Zone TV, actually, I didn't start it. There's a founder there, and it was a successful business. And in fact, when I ran product at SBC AT&T, I actually brought these guys in to do apps on TV when that was really a new concept and not done a lot. So there was a company here. My role when I came in was to take it to the next level and really bring content into what was a technology focused platform. So I think there's, to simplify what we do, think Pandora for TV. We use machine learning to personalize and curate TV channels that personalize for you. And there's lots of ways that can show up in interactive experiences and linear channels and on demand. But I think at its simplest, that's the way to think about it. And it is a mix of tech and content and experiences for consumers that are really easy to use.
So it stays on top of whatever platform that the user has. So this is just an add-on that comes on top and it
That's right.
customizes the viewing experience
That's
for.
exactly right. And so it can be an app on your mobile phone or your iOS device or Roku. What is somewhat unique about us, though, is it can also show up on Comcast or DirecTV or a traditional cable satellite platform. It's a little bit of the secret sauce that we have that a typical, if you will, app developer doesn't know how to play in. Putting the business piece with that technology understanding has been at the heart of my career. And I tell people about that in different ways all the time. It serves me all the way to today with artificial intelligence and machine learning, putting that together with consumers' desire for content, the Pandora for TV kind of idea. But it all starts with that just understanding what tech can do for you, maybe not, being able to design the chip underneath, but how you can put that to work in those business principles and bring something to a consumer that matters. It all goes back to that.
Great to hear, Jeff. So to given all of your experience and work and where do you see us going in this, the merger of technology and media and so on, just prognosticating for the future.
Sure.
Because you have that ability, and I sensed it even back then and certainly now where you are. So what do you see going ahead, Jeff?
Yeah, it's really interesting. So we're in this kind of focus around TV and, broadband driving everything, but customers are in this place. The streaming wars are, Netflix and Hulu and cable is, taking it on the chin pretty good right now. But I don't expect that the momentum continues in the same way. And I mean that in the following way. Consumers want things to be simple. So I think what customers are saying today is, there's lots of great content. I want to have access to the content. But you're starting to see where they're missing the simplicity of, I've got one place that has aggregated all of my content. We've called it a cable company for a long time, or a satellite company. Now I've got to figure out what input to go to, is it what app, how do I get it? Oh, is the show I want on Netflix or Hulu, or I don't know. And, that level of complexity is not what consumers want. So to me, the next fight, and it shows up in what we're doing with personalization and artificial intelligence, is the equivalent of who can aggregate all that content and present it to customers in the simplest way. I want to sit down and I want the content I want available to me, and I do not want to have to work at it. And right now, the industry as a whole is making consumers work pretty hard. And that in concert with my cable bill was too high. So instead of paying $100, I'm going to get Netflix for, $8 and then $12. Oh, and I want HBO Max and Hulu. And all of a sudden I've got $100 bill over here and my cable bill's down to 50, but as a whole, I'm paying, right? So the simplicity of aggregation and how somebody can do that in a way that's right for a customer, along with getting the business model right, which I think is really the hard part in all of this, that's where the fight is going to be going forward. So I don't think it's just a continuation of all the streaming wars and that's, take it out another 10 steps. Somebody's going to aggregate in a better way. You see Apple trying to do a little bit of that. And I don't know who obviously the winners are going to be, but some version of personalization in a different way.
One of the things too, and you've talked about this some, is kind of the blurring of boundaries between distinct sort of industries.
Yes.
And there's going to be even more, it seems like, from what you're saying.
I absolutely think so. So what is a TV company? Amazon and AT&T 20 years ago weren't bumping up against one another. There wasn't a Netflix, and so that mix of software, hardware, content, and I think I sum all of that in who can aggregate all that content and make it simple. but I think those industries are going to continue to bump up against one another. And maybe the strategic side of me is those profit pools and where they sit today are moving, right? And if your only profit pool is TV, you have a huge, and so if you're a satellite company, that's a pretty uncomfortable place to be. You don't have broadband, you don't have wireless, you don't own content. So how those profit pools move are going to bring, I think, some of those industries together, and not all of them will survive, I suspect. You're going to lose value in just one area. Things change too fast, especially now, right? And so it's okay in the early part of your career maybe to be a little more functional and specific. That's the role you have. But being pretty mindful about broadening your value and sort of a little more strategic in your thinking will always serve someone well, in my opinion.
Yeah. So COBOL is a great starting point. But,
Yeah.
but you,
Turns out I'd be really hungry if that was the only skill I had. I would be able to lose weight. That would be the good news. But
there aren't very many programmers out there that know COBOL, though, Jeff. So
no,
you'd have an advantage.
that's true. And I mean, I'd own all the buggy whips, right?
Yeah,
It's the equivalent.
yeah. So that's great. So that brings us to our final four, which is our fun category. So
Okay.
so we'll dive in. You know, you're a busy guy. You've done a lot of things, but when you do have the time, you know, what do you like to do for fun?
Really enjoy hiking and fly fishing, and I'm not doing much of either these days. But those, you know, you sort of get out on your own, or generally, you know, not masses of people, and beautiful typically. And I love doing both of those things, and wish I was doing a lot more, I can tell you.
Yeah, that's great. And I must say that, you know, Jeff grew up in Norman, right?
Yes, yes.
And he lived in enemy territory for a little while.
Yes, that's right.
We talked about this before we started, but now he's moved into somewhat more neutral ground.
Little neutral ground in Fort Worth. That's right. That's right.
Where we have our Red River rivalry, more or less.
Yes, yes.
That's great. And hopefully you'll be able to do all those fun things soon. And
Yes, I appreciate that.
do you have a favorite book that you like or have read, or something that's impressed you, Jeff, that stayed with you, or something that you're reading now?
You know, you'll appreciate this, Porter on Competition. And I think it may be one of those where it just had such an impact on me because it really broadened my thinking at the time. But that's the one that I, you know, kind of go back to again and again, and just the notion. Yeah, I mean, it's such a powerful book, but that's probably the one I would point to.
Like a kind of you know, to ask a person in media, you know, is there a favorite movie or TV or
Oh boy,
show or you're streaming or you watched, or something that you've loved?
you know, the movie that it doesn't matter if I'm flipping through Shawshank Redemption is, I just love that movie. You know, the characters are great, the story is great, and you know, that's one of my all-time favorites.
Oh, I share that with you, Jeff. I'll put that up on top. Yeah.
More than one time, you know, I'm about ready to go to bed, and it's 20 minutes in, and I'm like, okay, well, I'm staying up. I know that.
It is a fantastic movie.
It's fantastic. Yeah.
I couldn't agree more. So that's a great one. And then my last question, which is favorite food or drink that you like?
Boy, you know, a good scotch and a steak is just hard to beat. It is just hard to beat.
It's hard to beat, yeah.
Yeah. And far too often I'm taking advantage of it, especially during COVID. So,
single malt or blended?
Yeah,
or
single malt all the way.
All the way.
Macallan 18, ideally. That is a good day for me.
That's a good one. Yeah, well, I've heard that alcohol sales are up during this,
Yeah,
period. So,
I'm afraid it may be me driving that. I'm a little concerned about it.
it's been so much fun, Jeff.
This was great. I really appreciate the opportunity to do this.